the Real News Network. We're live in Manchester, New Hampshire, covering the New Hampshire primaries of the Republican and Democratic Party. Now, joining us in the studio to talk about immigration policy of the various candidates is Hector Salamanca Arroyo. Did I pronounce it right?
You did.
So Hector works with the grassroots engagement as the grassroots engagement coordinator with American Friends Service Committees, a presidential campaign project in Iowa, but he's here working in New Hampshire during these primaries. He's originally from Puebla, Mexico. He's been an Iowa native for the past 20 years. He's a recent graduate from Drake University with a BA in Law, Politics, and Society. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So tell us a bit about your story, because it kind of informs a lot of this debate. Your family, tell us how your family came. What was the legality of it? And then your own situation.
So in 1996, my family came to the United States from Puebla, Mexico, and we've been residing in Iowa ever since. My tourist visa expired in 2003, which for all intents and purposes made me an undocumented immigrant. I did not learn about my status until 2010, when the DREAM Act was about to be introduced into Congress.
And you didn't know that you were undocumented, or that your parents were?
That is correct.
And can I ask, what work were your parents doing?
So at the time, my family members were working in the nursing industry. They were able to secure jobs and were able to work that way.
As you said, nursing?
Yes.
Okay. And so you found out, in what year was this, that you were undocumented?
2010, 2011.
And it hadn't affected your ability to go to school or such?
Not at that moment, but as soon as I graduated high school, it became apparent that I wasn't going to be able to continue my education or join the military at the time that I thought I was going to do.
So what happened next?
So afterwards, I decided to enroll in community college, got involved in the community, started volunteering with American Friends Service Committee, and when 2012 came around, that's when the Deferred Action for Child Arrival program was announced by President Obama.
And you signed up?
Yes, I did. I applied, submitted the fee, and was accepted into the program, which it makes me eligible to work for 2 years and allows me to get a driver's license and continue basically participating in American society.
2 years?
For 2-year increments. After 2 years, you can renew the program and fill out the process all over again.
And is there in that any path to permanency?
No, and it's one of in having conversations with a lot of people at these events, it's something that they don't realize is that the executive order doesn't put you on a path towards citizenship or legality, but rather allows you to work, pay taxes, and be a contributing member of society to a certain extent.
So at any point at some 2-year period, you could be in theory told to go back to Mexico?
Yes, in theory that could happen. That's why this presidential election is very important for myself.
It's only an executive order. A different president
could overrule it.
Could just have a different executive order or let that one expire.
Yes, they could.
The same president that helped create this 2-year window for you is responsible for more deportations, I believe, than any other administration.
That is correct as well.
So what do you make of that?
It's ironic. On one hand, his policies and the policies of his predecessors are that of inspiring hope. At the same time, they're detaining immigrants and deporting them, and at times housing them in for-profit detention centers.
Yeah, talk about that. That's really why you're in New Hampshire. You want to talk about these for-profit facilities that are housing detainees.
Yeah, so these for-profit prisons and the affiliates and the companies that create them were able to successfully pass a mandate called the 34,000 Immigrant Detention Mandate, which requires undocumented immigrants to be detained each day in for-profit detention centers. And these are names like CCA and GEO, the biggest private prison corporations in the United States.
So explain that it mandates they must be. Who's mandated?
So the ICE, Immigrant Customs Enforcement, is mandated through the
have to pick up 34,000 people a day
at least,
in order to fulfill these contracts with these private owners of these detention centers.
Yes,
and what happens if they don't?
At the moment, it's unclear what happens if they don't. But when they do pick people up, they're also counting children, mothers, and fathers. There's a detention center in Tucson.
They're sort of delivering heads.
Essentially, yes. Yes, they've also gone down a very interesting road in Arizona where they're trying to open a daycare in one of these detention centers due to the amount of children that they're also housing.
And It's a little mind-boggling. And has any candidates come out against it? You've been following the candidates, you've been asking questions at town halls. Has Sanders, Clinton, or any of the Republicans come out against this policy?
Yes, I'm excited to say that both now the Democratic candidates, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, have spoken against it. And to our surprise, Jeb Bush as well has spoken against the issue. And this has been through repeatedly asking them this exact same question and making sure that they're all on board with repealing such a horrible mandate. We've also had conversations with Marco Rubio, the one of two Latino candidates that are running for president. Ironically, he has told us, and myself specifically, that we have to enforce the law, and for him, detaining immigrants that are undocumented, that are children, is part of his view of enforcing the law.
And has either candidate, Sanders or Clinton, said they're going to close down these detention centers?
Hillary, in her immigrant policy, hasn't yet gone that far, but Bernie Sanders and former Governor Martin O'Malley, when he was running, both stated they would close these for-profit detention centers and close detention centers in general.
And in terms of overall immigration policy between Sanders and Clinton, what do you see? Is there a distinction there?
So at the moment, in regards to this issue, Bernie Sanders is the candidate that's promising to eliminate them. We have yet...
No, I'm talking more generally.
More generally.
In terms of the mass deportations that are going on, the fact that President Obama is deporting more people, I believe, than any previous administration, has that been criticized at all by either candidate?
Yes, it has. I've seen both the Democrats and Republicans question President Obama's commitment to deportations and how ironic it is that a president that was elected on a promise of hope and change is continuing these deportations.
When you look at Donald Trump, who I guess has one of the more controversial proposals on what to do to stop unauthorized or illegal immigration from Mexico, is he wants to build apparently a 30 or 40-foot high wall, and that, in theory, will stop people from coming. I actually never heard anyone ask him about why people wouldn't just tunnel under it. But anyway, what's your response to this wall building?
So as an immigrant and as someone who's undocumented, who has DACA, I say it's a preposterous idea to create a wall to eliminate people from coming over.
Why?
Why? Because it doesn't make any sense. First off, logistically, you can't just create a wall and expect a foreign country to pay for it. Secondly, there's other resources that need to be taken care of before such an event were to happen.
Say again?
There's more things. I believe that there are other policy solutions that can be addressed to solve this issue than building a wall and essentially eliminating people from coming over.
Well, if you take the logic of his wall, his primary logic is that there's such a wage differential in Mexico as compared to the United States that there's no way to stop illegal immigration without some kind of physical barrier, because as long as people can make more money in the United States, they're going to come. What do you make of that logic?
I still think the idea of creating a wall to eliminate people from coming over it isn't in accordance with U.S. policy. It doesn't make any sense to me. I've always seen the United States as a beacon of hope, and you can't have a beacon of hope if you have a wall around it.
But that's beacon of hope is kind of generalization. I mean, he's talking about that. He says at great. In fact, I think there's lots of data that shows otherwise. But wages are lower in the United States because there's a lot of very, desperate people coming here willing to work for very cheap wages. And so you have to stem the flow of that. What are the alternatives to doing that? Like you said, there's other social policy that could be followed. What is it?
Well, I would see, for myself, I say that we need a humane approach when dealing with immigrants who are trying to enter the country, and it needs to be done humanely. I don't see a wall. First off, it's kind of hard for me to even fathom this, just because creating a wall doesn't exist in my mentality of what the U.S. is and what it could be. It's not something I see as a reality, so I don't spend a lot of time even fantasizing about a wall being created.
Well, if you touch it more generally, one of the major themes of the Republican campaign is the whole issue of immigration, and it's certainly resonating with large sections of the working class. What do you say to workers that are being influenced by this? Forget the wall, but who see immigrants, undocumented immigrants, as sort of a threat to their own wages and working conditions?
I struggle with that. I see being Latino and having attended both Democrat and Republican events for what I do, I'm usually the only Latino in these Republican events. And when I look around, I see a lot of fear, a lot of apprehension. And for me, it's because they don't quite understand what's going on in the country. They're only being fed tidbits and news bits and don't understand why.
As an example. Of what
As
you
an
mean.
example, there was an event I attended where a woman was telling me, why can't I just get back in the line? For some reason, that's rhetoric that's always apparent when it comes to immigration. A lot of people just ask you, why don't you go back to the back of the line? I can tell you that there is no line. There is no single file line that you can just hop back into and enter into the U.S. legally or enter the U.S. immigrant law in a simple way. It doesn't exist. That's rhetoric that just happens to be tossed around every 4 years, every 8 years. It's nothing that I could personally do or anyone that I know could personally do. So that's only a tidbit. And every time I go to any of these events where immigration is brought up, it doesn't necessarily hurt me, but it does at some time make me realize that a lot of people don't even know how the immigrant process works. Immigration law, I've heard, is just as difficult to understand as tax law is. And I don't know about you, but I'm not well versed in tax law either. So it's very few people actually know how immigrant law works as well as tax law.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Hector. Right now we're going to go to Jessica Devereaux, and she's out in the field somewhere in New Hampshire. Where are you, Jessica?
Hey, Paul, we are here actually in a field office for Senator Sanders' campaign. I'm joined with Lindsay, who's a volunteer from New Hampshire. Lindsay, you told me you already voted absentee for Bernie, clearly. Lindsay, why are you supporting Bernie Sanders' campaign for president?
I think he's an honest leader, an honest man. I really like what he's running on and the stance that he's running on.
Let's talk specifics. What sort of attracts you? What resonates with you? What message in particular?
That he does not want money in politics. I think that money definitely influences on how you would run the country. He definitely walks the walk and talks the talk. He's here to represent people.
Okay. A lot of folks are saying there's a lot of momentum behind Bernie, but for you, being from New Hampshire, are you taking this energy and thinking about in what other ways you can become more active politically? Has that been something you've considered?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to school for social work right now, and it's definitely an area that I'm considering after I graduate.
Is there anything more political, for example, that you would be interested in doing? Are you thinking about that as well?
After he leaves New Hampshire, I'm thinking about going to surrounding states to volunteer for the campaign then too.
Okay, great. Paul, I'm going to send it back to you in the studio. We're going to have more interviews from folks like, yeah, sure, Paul. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, if you could ask.
Paul has a couple questions for you in the
Yeah, if you
studio.
could ask your guest. Some people have been suggesting that while Senator Sanders is calling for a political revolution from below, he's also said that if he isn't the successful candidate, he would endorse and support Secretary Clinton. And in doing so, that would wind up kind of supporting the Democratic Party again, the Democratic Party establishment. And they wonder whether, in the end, whether he might kind of just deliver a lot of young people to Secretary Clinton and back to kind of business as usual. What does she think of that?
Okay, we're going to play a bit of telephone here. I'm just going to paraphrase a bit. So the question to you, Lindsay, is that Senator Sanders, as you know, he has said that if he doesn't get the Democratic nomination, that he will support Secretary Clinton. And a lot of folks are seeing this as a way where all of this young energy will eventually just be put back into the Democratic establishment party. What do you make of that?
I would support him if he would support Hillary if she got the nomination. I think it's important for a Democrat to win for the sake of our country. Yeah, so I
Would you feel a little bit cheated though that, you know, there's because they are drastically different on a lot of issues. So would you feel that your all of that energy, like this is the first time, like we discussed, you being politically active, and now for that energy to now be put back into the establishment Democratic Party, would you feel cheated at all?
We'll take his recommendations into consideration, and maybe her campaign would change a little bit. But in my mind right now, Bernie's winning, so that really hasn't crossed my mind.
Okay, really hasn't crossed her mind, Paul. Anything else you want me to ask our lovely guest here? Okay, well, thank you, Lindsay, so much for being with us. And Paul, we're sending it back to you in the studio.
Hey, thanks very much. We're going to now go to an interview that we did a little earlier. Stephen Miller, he's a foreign policy advisor for Donald Trump. And he and I had a kind of, what could you say, vigorous discussion about Donald Trump, both in terms of foreign policy and immigration policy, and building the Great Wall of Mexico, or Great Wall of the United States that he's proposing. So we're going to show that, and then we'll be back again live. Am I right about that?
Yes, Alabama.
Thank you. And he joins us here in the studio. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Although, so this interview doesn't get too off track,